Look, before I tell you why the Triaxian hegemony modified their entire military doctrine and added 16 new protocols specifically for dealing with isolated human combatants, we should probably talk about what humans mean to the wider galactic community. See, most species out there took a nice logical path through evolution. They developed tools because they needed them, advanced their technology through careful research, and generally behaved like rational beings. Humans? We're what happens when evolution gets drunk and starts making dares. Take Private Danny Martinez, for example. In the grand scheme of the universe, he wasn't particularly special by human standards. Average height, average build, and psychological evaluations that read like a cautionary tale. The only remarkable thing about him was his uncanny ability to find himself in increasingly improbable situations, which is why everyone called him Murphy's Law. The year is 2184 and humanity has spread across 12 star systems. We're not the biggest players in the galactic community, not by a long shot, but we've earned ourselves quite the reputation. The Triaxians, like most alien species, initially dismissed us as primitive upstarts. Their official intelligence report described humans as physically unimpressive bipedal mammals with concerning psychological abnormalities and a disturbing tendency to survive scenarios. They have no statistical probability of surviving. That last part was added after their first few encounters with human space explorers. Apparently, watching a human repair a fusion drive with bubblegum and interpretive dance moves does something to an alien's perception of reality. The 42nd Human Defense Force was where they sent the soldiers who were too weird for regular units, but too effective to discharge. Their motto, unofficially, was, "We have no idea how it worked, but it worked." Danny fit right in. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Rodriguez, had a special drawer in his desk filled with incident reports that all began with some variation of Private Martinez against all logic and direct orders. There was the time Danny reprogrammed a cleaning bot to serve as an impromptu reconnaissance drone during a training exercise. The fact that he did this while concussed and hanging upside down from a tree was, according to the report, concerning but impressively on brand. The bot went on to win 3 dance competitions before anyone realized it was leaking classified data through interpretive choreography. Then there was the infamous noodle incident that nobody likes to talk about, mainly because 6 different species' diplomatic corps are still trying to figure out how he managed it. The official report was classified, redacted, and then classified again just to be safe. The only readable part says, "And that's why we no longer allow Private Martinez to carry condiments during first contact situations." Outpost Delta 7 on Kepler 186F was supposed to be a quiet posting. The moon was technically disputed territory, but only because bureaucracy moves slower than a hungover sloth in both human and Triaxian space. The Triaxians claimed they had legal right to it because they'd spotted it first. We claimed it because we'd actually bothered to put boots on the ground. This led to what diplomatic historians would later call a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, and what the rest of us call that time we went to war because neither side would admit they were being petty. The Triaxians were the most methodical species in known space. They had protocols for their protocols. Their military doctrine was thicker than most planets' constitutions. Every single action had to be run through at least 12 different tactical simulations before being approved. Their idea of improvisation was using a backup plan they'd only rehearsed 99 times instead of 100. Which is why when Danny volunteered for the night patrol on what everyone expected to be another boring shift, Lieutenant Rodriguez actually approved it. The lieutenant's exact words were, "Even Murphy's Law has to take a break sometimes, right?" The universe, it turns out, has a sense of humor, and that sense of humor involves taking Murphy's Law, applying it to a soldier literally nicknamed Murphy's Law, and watching what happens when the most unpredictable species in the galaxy goes up against the most predictable one. This is the story of how one human soldier fought for 6 hours after losing 3 limbs, and why the Triaxians surrendered when they found out he was still alive. It's also the story of why the Galactic Council had to create a new classification for human combat techniques, somewhere between physically impossible and metaphysically offensive. Trust me, it only gets weirder from here. The first sign that something was wrong came when Danny's helmet sensors picked up movement in a sector that was supposed to be emptier than a Martian bar on tax day. The second sign was when his comms went dead mid-check-in, cutting off Lieutenant Rodriguez's usual reminder to try not to start an interstellar incident before breakfast. The third sign was getting his legs blown off by a triaxion plasma mine. Now, standard operating procedure when losing both legs in combat is to lay down, call for medical evacuation, and try very hard not to die. It's written right there in the manual, probably in bold letters with helpful diagrams. Danny, being Danny, took this more as a friendly suggestion than a rule. His first coherent thought after the explosion wasn't, "I need help," or even, "This really hurts." It was, I wonder if I can still complete my patrol route like this. The answer was yes, but not in any way the Triaxion combat manuals had anticipated, or in any way that would preserve their tactical analyst's mental health. Using his armor's emergency medical systems and enough combat stims to kill a small elephant, or a medium-sized elephant that was just feeling a bit under the weather, Danny began dragging himself through the lunar dust with his arms. The Triaxion advance team, watching through their scopes, were initially confused. According to Protocol 7B subsection 12, an enemy combatant who loses multiple limbs should immediately cease combat operations and await either capture or medical assistance. They became even more confused when Danny started shooting back. Target has sustained catastrophic injuries but continues to display hostile intent, reported Scout Leader Keksavi to the Triaxion Command Center, requesting tactical guidance, also possibly psychological counseling. The response took 12 minutes because the Triaxions had to review their manuals to find a protocol for this situation. They didn't find one. They did, however, find 3 different protocols for dealing with malfunctioning cleaning equipment, which tells you a lot about Triaxion priorities. While they were looking, Danny managed to take out 3 of their sensor arrays with surprisingly accurate one-handed shots. This was particularly impressive considering he was also using his other arm to crawl through a crater field while bleeding out. The Triaxion combat recorder noted that he was humming what their cultural database identified as classic Earth show tunes, which only added to their confusion. Target appears to be engaging in recreational musical activities while conducting combat operations, reported a thoroughly bewildered sensor operator. This contradicts Protocol 15C regarding appropriate battlefield behavior. It was around this time that the Triaxions decided to solve the problem with their usual approach: overwhelming firepower. They brought in their heavy weapons, state-of-the-art plasma cannons that could vaporize a light tank. These weapons were the pride of Triaxion military engineering, featuring targeting systems so advanced they could hit a flying insect from 2 kilometers away, which is why it was particularly embarrassing when Danny somehow managed to dodge their first volley by accidentally passing out and falling into a crater right as they fired. Target has employed advanced evasive maneuvers consisting of losing consciousness, reported one increasingly frustrated officer. Our tactical simulations did not account for this strategy. When he regained consciousness 3 minutes later, Danny found himself in an interesting situation. He had lost both legs, his left arm was now severely damaged from plasma fire, and he was running out of blood faster than a politician runs from responsibility. On the plus side, he had fallen into what appeared to be an abandoned Triaxion supply cache. The Triaxion Command Center received the following reports in rapid succession. 0742. Target has accessed restricted military supplies, implementing Containment Protocol 23A. 0743. Target appears to be singing to our medical equipment. 0744. Multiple system malfunctions reported. Equipment is responding to unauthorized musical input. 0745. Request immediate support. Target has weaponized our medical supplies. They really should have implemented their containment protocols faster. By the time they got their forces in position, Danny had already figured out how to hotwire a Triaxion medical unit with one hand and a multi-tool he kept forgetting to return to the armory. The fact that he managed this while suffering from massive blood loss and operating on enough stims to qualify as a walking pharmacy was, according to later analysis, statistically improbable to the point of mathematical protest. That's when things really started to get out of hand. The Triaxian Command was now facing a situation their extensive military doctrine had never considered. A critically wounded human soldier who was not only refusing to die according to proper combat protocols but was actually becoming more effective at causing chaos. They did what any highly organized military force would do in this situation. They called for backup. A lot of backup. This would prove to be, as humans say, a tactically dubious decision, or as Danny would later put it in his own report, cool, more stuff to play with. The thing about calling for backup is that it requires explaining why you need it. The Triaxian command structure was now faced with the uncomfortable task of reporting that an entire advance force was being systematically disrupted by what was, technically speaking, 1/4 of a human soldier. "Central Command," began Field Commander Rixatol, "we are experiencing difficulties with an atypical human combatant." "Define atypical," came the response. "The subject has lost 73% of total limb mass but continues to demonstrate tactical coherence and combat effectiveness. Our strategic predictive matrices are struggling." That was an understatement. The matrices were having the digital equivalent of a nervous breakdown. Their combat computers, designed to process millions of tactical scenarios per second, were spitting out error messages that roughly translated to "no, seriously, what the hell?" Danny, meanwhile, had discovered that a severed robotic Triaxian arm made an excellent improvised weapon when you wedged it into your own partly severed arm socket. The fact that he thought to try this while experiencing enough blood loss to make a trauma surgeon faint was, according to later psychological evaluations, deeply concerning and somehow very on-brand. "He appears to be utilizing our own prosthetic technology against us," reported an increasingly distressed tactical officer. "This was not covered in the manual." "Which manual are you referencing?" asked Central Command. "Any of them?" The next 2 hours became a masterclass in human unpredictability versus alien strategic doctrine. Danny, now operating on a cocktail of military stims, civilian stims he found in the medical cache, and what medical professionals would later describe as pure weapons-grade spite, began a systematic campaign of chaos. His first act with his new arm was to hack into the Triaxian battlefield network. Their cybersecurity, designed to withstand the most sophisticated AI attacks, proved surprisingly vulnerable to what Danny called aggressive, percussive maintenance, which mostly involved hitting things until they worked the way he wanted them to. "Sir," reported a communications officer, "the human is now broadcasting something called 'Never Gonna Give You Up' across all tactical frequencies." "Analysis," demanded the commander. "Cultural database suggests this is something called a rickroll. It appears to be some form of psychological warfare, sir." Danny didn't stop there. He reprogrammed their medical drones to play earth-heavy metal music while dispensing medical supplies, creating what he would later describe in his report as a mosh pit with first aid characteristics. 3 Triaxian units reported experiencing what their psychiatrists would later classify as acute cultural shock. But it was his creative use of their own technology that really started to break them. He figured out how to override their battlefield illumination systems, turning the entire combat zone into what one Triaxian described as a disturbing recreation of an Earth entertainment venue called a disco. The resulting light show would later be visible from orbit and described in official reports as tactically and aesthetically offensive. "Subject is displaying battlefield adaptability that exceeds our tactical simulations," noted one frustrated analyst. "Requesting permission to designate this as a Class 7 strategic anomaly." "Denied," responded Central Command. "We are not classifying one partially dismembered human as a strategic anomaly." That's when Danny figured out how to use their own power cells as improvised explosives. He didn't just throw them. He calculated trajectories using what he called eyeballing it, a human technique that caused several triaxion mathematics experts to suffer what they later described as calculation-induced distress. The triaxions, faced with a situation that increasingly defied their understanding of physics, biology, and basic common sense, attempted to adapt. They deployed their elite shock troops, the pride of the hegemony, warriors who had trained for decades in every possible combat scenario. Danny greeted them by launching himself out of a crater using a jury-rigged propulsion system he'd cobbled together from spare parts and what he later admitted was mostly wishful thinking and duct tape. The sight of a three-quarters dismembered human soldier flying through the low gravity, trailing medical stims and screaming what their translators identified as yeet, caused the first documented case of mass confusion in Triaxion military history. "Update threat assessment," came the order from Central Command. "What exactly are we dealing with?" The response from the field was delayed, partly because the officer in charge was watching Danny use his detached leg as an improvised club against a sensor array, and partly because there was no protocol for describing what they were witnessing. Finally, they settled on, "Subject demonstrates tactical capabilities that suggest either advanced military augmentation or complete psychological detachment from normal operational parameters." The truth, as they would later learn, was much simpler and much more terrifying. This was just a regular human being having what he would later describe as a bit of a rough day. And it was about to get rougher. It was around hour 4 when Commander Vexathor arrived on the scene. As the most decorated tactical mind in the Triaxion hegemony's Third Fleet, he had personally written 7 volumes of their combat doctrine. He took one look at the situation and immediately realized 2 things. First, none of his books were going to help here, and second, he was going to have to write Volume 8, possibly titled, "What to Do When Nothing Makes Sense Anymore." "Report," he ordered, staring at the chaos before him, "and please try to make it make sense." The junior officer assigned to brief him tried 3 times to start the report before finally saying, "Sir, the human is now using his severed arm as a puppet to taunt our forward units while simultaneously rewiring our command protocols with his other arm, the artificial one he stole from us. The puppet appears to be narrating its actions in rhyme, sir," added another officer whose eye was twitching. "The rhymes are intentionally terrible. Our cultural analysts believe this may be another form of psychological warfare." Vexathor had studied humans extensively. He had analyzed their military history, their tactical doctrines, their psychological profiles. He had even written a thesis on human combat adaptability. None of it had prepared him for watching a critically wounded soldier turn a battlefield into what his cultural database suggested was a combination of a slapstick comedy and a tech support nightmare. "Sir," called out a sensor operator, "the human has accessed our primary communication array." "How?" demanded Vexathor. "The security protocol—" "He threw his other leg at it, sir. Apparently he had reprogrammed his medical nanites to— I'm not actually sure how to describe what they did, but our systems are now playing something called Never Gonna Give You Up on all frequencies. This is the 14th time in the last hour." Psychological impact. 3 units have reported symptoms of what they're calling rhythmic distress, sir. 2 more have started. I believe the human term is bobbing their heads. Vexathor watched as Danny, now essentially a torso with one borrowed arm, continued to systematically dismantle their carefully planned operation. The human had somehow turned their own battlefield recovery systems against them, using them to bounce from position to position like some kind of deranged combat pinball. "Have we at least figured out why he's still conscious?" Vexathor asked. "The medical readings show that he should have died approximately 3 hours and 47 minutes ago," completed the medical officer. "We've had to create 6 new categories just to classify his vital signs. Sir, according to these readings, he's technically been dead twice. He seems to have gotten better. Our medical AI is threatening to resign." That's when Danny managed to hack into their command channel. What followed was a one-sided conversation that would later be classified as psychologically damaging. to several junior officers. "Hey guys," came the worryingly cheerful voice, slurred slightly from what the medical readout suggested was enough stimulants to kill a small herd of combat-grade bioforms. "Quick question. Does your tactical doctrine cover what to do when your enemy converts their own severed limbs into impromptu bowling balls? Because I've got 2 more legs, and I'm pretty sure I can get a strike. Also, your medical AI is really nice. We're planning to go out for virtual coffee after this." Vexathor, demonstrating the strategic genius that had earned him his position, immediately realized that standard tactics weren't just failing, they were actively making things worse. Every response they had attempted had somehow given Danny more tools to work with, more systems to hack, or more opportunities to demonstrate that human creativity becomes exponentially more dangerous when combined with massive blood loss and a complete disregard for personal safety. "Sir," reported another officer, "he's now using our own battlefield medical protocols to—" "Is he—" "Yes, he's using them to juggle plasma grenades while singing. Analysis suggests the song is something called I'm Still Standing. The title appears to be ironic given his current lack of legs." "The singing is intentionally off-key, sir," added a cultural specialist. "I believe this makes it worse. Also, 3 of our combat drones have joined in on the chorus." Vexathor made what would later be recorded as the first sigh in documented Triaxian history. "Begin evacuation of non-essential personnel," he ordered. "And someone please tell me we at least have him contained." "Well, sir," began an officer, then stopped as all their tactical displays suddenly transformed into what the cultural database identified as early Earth video game graphics. "Is that Space Invaders?" asked Vexathor, surprising himself with his knowledge of human entertainment history. "Yes, sir. The human appears to have reprogrammed our entire battlefield management system to keep score." That's when the explosion happened. Not a normal explosion. Those they could handle. No, this was what happened when someone with a fundamental misunderstanding of the word impossible decided to see what would happen if you crossed Triaxian power cells with human emergency flares, and what appeared to be, according to later analysis, 3 pieces of chewing gum and a paperclip. The resulting detonation would later be described in scientific papers as technically not supposed to be possible, and an offense against the laws of physics. When the 42nd Human Defense Force finally fought their way through to Outpost Delta 7, they were prepared for the worst. What they found instead was something that would rewrite military doctrine across 17 species and cause at least 3 alien races to seriously reconsider their position on human alliance treaties. Lieutenant Rodriguez led the rescue team personally, following a trail of destruction that looked like someone had combined a technical manual with a cartoon physics simulator. They found Danny unconscious in what used to be the Triaxian Command Center, surrounded by sophisticated alien technology that had been reprogrammed to play Earth cat videos on infinite loop. "He's here, sir," called out a medic. He's mostly here. Vital signs are—" "Sir, I don't think these readings can be right." Danny was propped up against a console, missing 3 limbs and most of his blood, with a crude sign made from scavenged parts that read, "Took a break, back in 5 minutes," balanced on his chest. Next to him sat a neat stack of captured Triaxian data cores, each labeled with helpful notes like "important stuff," "more important stuff," and funny videos of aliens running away. A small holographic projection was playing what appeared to be a highlight reel of his greatest hits from the battle, set to classical music. The medical team's initial assessment read like a creative writing exercise. Patient status report. Missing both legs, one found being used as a doorstop, other reported in orbit somewhere. Left arm severed, currently being used as a puppet to entertain captured Triaxian drones. Right arm replaced with modified Triaxian prosthetic, showing signs of unauthorized upgrades. Blood loss exceeding 70% of total volume, supplemented by improvised solutions that medical science is afraid to examine too closely. Enough combat stimulants in system to classify patient as a walking pharmacy. Note, Accuracy of walking descriptor disputed. Multiple instances of clinical death. Patient appears to have rejected this outcome on principle. Signs of what medics are tentatively calling spite-powered cellular regeneration. That's when they notice the Triaxion delegation approaching under a flag of surrender. 3 different flags, actually, being waved rather enthusiastically by what appeared to be reprogrammed maintenance droids. Commander Vexathor stepped forward looking like someone who had just watched everything he knew about warfare get thrown out an airlock and then watch that airlock get turned into an impromptu disco ball. "We wish to discuss terms," he announced formally. Terms? Rodriguez was confused. The Triaxions had superior numbers, better position, and enough firepower to level the outpost. "You have us outnumbered 3-1. "Yes," Vexathor agreed, glancing nervously at Danny's unconscious form. "And you have him. We've run the numbers. 3-1 odds are not nearly enough." The Triaxion tactical analysis, later declassified, painted a picture that caused several military academies to revise their entire curriculum. Combat effectiveness analysis. Subject demonstrated 47 previously unknown ways to weaponize medical supplies, created 12 new categories of improvised explosives, achieved what our physicists are calling technically impossible results 23 different times, caused widespread psychological distress through creative use of Earth entertainment media, reprogrammed 37 security systems using methods best described as percussive maintenance, successfully ignored death on multiple occasions, demonstrated ability to convert any available technology into either a weapon or a music player, showed disturbing talent for turning own injuries into tactical advantages. "Our tactical simulations suggest," Vexathor explained, looking haunted, "that if we continue this engagement and he regains consciousness, he will only have more spare parts to work with. Additionally, our psychological analysis suggests that he was, and I quote from our experts, just getting started." Rodriguez looked at Danny, then at the destruction around them, then back at Danny. "He's just one soldier," he said, trying not to smile. "Exactly," Vexathor replied. "You have an entire species of potential soldiers like him. Our strategic analysis suggests that continuing this conflict would be unwise. Additionally, 3 of our AI systems have filed for asylum, 2 are requesting therapy, and 1 has developed what it claims is a sense of humor." That's when Danny stirred slightly in his unconscious state, causing 3 Triaxion commandos to flinch and reach for their weapons. The movement also dislodged a datapad from his remaining arm, which had apparently been recording the whole time. The last entry read, "Dear Diary, today was fun. Should do this again sometime. P.S. If anyone finds this, I think I still have a leg somewhere in Sector 7. It's the left one. I kind of need it back because it has my keys in the pocket. PPS to the Triaxion Medical AI, still on for coffee next week. I know a great place in the neural network." The medical report would later become required reading at both human and alien military academies, filed under Case Studies in Statistical Impossibility. The psychological evaluation caused 3 different alien species to create entirely new branches of psychiatric study. But perhaps most tellingly, the Triaxion Combat Manual was immediately revised with a new opening chapter titled "Why Some Battles Aren't Worth Fighting," or "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Accept Human Insanity." 6 months later, Private Danny Murphy's Law Martinez stood before a class of thoroughly terrified alien military officers, his new cybernetic limbs gleaming under the classroom lights. The limbs had been a gift from the Triaxion hegemony, partly as a peace offering and partly because they were genuinely curious to see what he'd do with them. So far, he'd only weaponized them twice, which the Triaxions considered remarkable restraint. "And that's why you should always carry duct tape into combat," he concluded, finishing his lecture on human combat improvisation and why it keeps working. His new right arm transformed smoothly into what appeared to be a combination coffee maker and plasma torch. "Any questions?" A Triaxion cadet raised a trembling appendage. But none of that should have been possible. Our physics models." "Ah," Danny grinned, serving fresh coffee from his arm. That's the first lesson about humans you need to understand. Possible is more of a suggestion than a rule for us. Like that sign that says, "Don't feed the combat drones, watch this." The incident had changed everything about how the galactic community approached warfare with humans. The Triaxian military doctrine had been completely revised, with an entire volume now dedicated to human operational anomalies and how to avoid them. The chapter on Danny was longer than most species' entire military manuals. Some key additions to the manual included Protocol 89D. If a human soldier appears to be defeated, they are probably not. Protocol 89E. If a human soldier is missing body parts, they are definitely not defeated. Protocol 89F. If a human soldier starts improvising, retreat immediately. Protocol 89G. Never under any circumstances give a partially dismembered human soldier access to spare parts. Protocol 89H. If a human begins to sing during combat, psychological support teams should be deployed immediately. Protocol 89-1. The phrase "watch this" from a human combatant should be treated as an immediate evacuation signal. The medical technology developed to keep Danny alive had revolutionized battlefield medicine across the galaxy. The Triaxians had even created a new combat rating called the Martinez factor, measuring a soldier's ability to function despite catastrophic injury. No one had ever scored higher than the original. The psychological impact was even more significant. 3 different alien species had to revise their entire concept of possible versus impossible. The Galactic Scientific Council created a new classification of phenomena called human improbability events, defined as occurrences that should not be possible but happen anyway, because a human decided the laws of physics were more like guidelines. Danny's new job as a military instructor came with some interesting stipulations. No access to experimental technology without 3 layers of supervision. No improving alien medical equipment. Required to file paperwork before having what he called an interesting idea. Not allowed to teach his creative problem-solving techniques without signing 17 different waivers. Mandatory cooling-off period after any sentence beginning with, "Hey, watch this." No conducting impromptu stress tests on alien technology. Absolutely no introducing more species to human music during combat situations. The paperwork was reviewed by 3 separate ethics committees and a team of physics professors who were still trying to figure out how he'd managed some of his improvised weapons. 2 of the professors had reportedly started a religion based on their findings, but the real change came in how the galaxy viewed humanity. The Triaxians had shared their footage of the incident, and suddenly every species in known space was revising their assessment of these strange, squishy bipeds who treated physics like an optional guideline and probability like a personal challenge. The most terrifying thing, Commander Vexathor would later write in his widely acclaimed memoir, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Accept Human Insanity, was not that he did these things. It was that, by human standards, his actions were considered only mildly unusual. When I asked his commanding officer about the incident, he simply shrugged and said, "Yeah, that's just Danny being Danny." The Galactic Council created 17 new laws specifically because of that incident. Danny had them framed. They hung in his classroom right next to the "Things I am no longer allowed to do in combat" list, which had to be updated weekly and was now longer than the original Triaxian military doctrine. The medical AI that Danny had befriended during the battle did eventually get that coffee date. It now runs a popular support group for artificial intelligences traumatized by exposure to human creativity. Their weekly meetings are held in a virtual cafe that somehow serves real coffee. No one knows how. No one wants to ask. And somewhere in the lunar dust of Kepler 186f, there's still a left leg with a set of keys in the pocket. Danny maintains that he'll get around to retrieving them eventually. The Triaxians have 3 battle groups stationed permanently in that sector to make sure he doesn't, just in case. After all, as the new first rule of the Triaxian military doctrine states, when dealing with humans, just in case is not paranoia. It's barely adequate preparation,